The mall loomed large, a dark giant against the night sky. Its towering structure seemed to absorb the moonlight, casting an ominous shadow over the deserted parking lot. A place of laughter and crowds just hours ago, it now stood silent, forbidding. The once bustling corridors were now empty, the silence almost deafening. 5 friends, Jake, Emily, Ben, Chloe, and Ryan, huddled near the entrance, their nervous giggles swallowed by the night. The air was thick with anticipation and a hint of fear. It was Jake's idea, a dare to spend 15 minutes inside the closed mall. He had always been the adventurous one, constantly seeking thrills and new experiences, just long enough to shoot some creepy footage for their YouTube channel. They hoped the video would go viral, bringing them the fame and recognition they craved.
Maybe this isn't such a good idea. Emily's voice trembled, betraying her anxiety.
Emily whispered, her eyes darting towards the darkened windows. She could almost feel the weight of the darkness pressing against the glass. A chorus of chickens and scaredy-cat from the others drowned out her protests. They teased her, trying to mask their own fears with laughter. Jake, armed with his camera and a flashlight, grinned, his bravado a thin veil over his own unease. He was determined to go through with the dare, no matter what. He jimmied the lock on the delivery entrance, the metallic clang echoing in the silence. The sound seemed to reverberate through the empty mall, amplifying their sense of isolation. One by one they slipped inside, the heavy door clanging shut behind them. The sound of the door closing felt like a final seal, trapping them inside. The air inside was stale, thick with the silence of 1,000 whispers. Dust motes floated in the weak light, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Shadows stretched and danced in the weak beam of Jake's flashlight. Every movement seemed to create new, unsettling shapes on the walls. The only sound was the thud of their own heartbeats. Each beat seemed louder than the last, echoing in the vast emptiness. They tiptoed deeper into the mall, their bravado fading with each step. The further they went, the more oppressive the darkness seemed to become. Rows of shops, now closed and dark, lined the walkways, their wares looking like caged animals in the gloom. The mannequins in the windows seemed to watch them, their eyes following their every move. They finally reached the central atrium, a large open space dominated by a dormant fountain. The silence here was even more profound, the emptiness almost tangible. Mannequins dressed in the latest fashions stared blankly from their window displays, their painted smiles suddenly sinister in the darkness. It was as if they were mocking the friends' fear. Jake set up his camera, framing the eerie scene. He adjusted the lens, trying to capture the perfect shot that would send chills down the viewer's spines.
Okay guys, let's do this. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt.
The friends fanned out, their nervous laughter echoing unnaturally in the stillness. The air was thick with anticipation. Each step they took seemed to amplify the eerie silence that surrounded them. They tried to mask their fear with jokes and laughter, but the tension was palpable. They filmed short snippets, their bravado returning as they played to the camera. The lens became their shield, a barrier between them and the unknown. They exaggerated their movements, trying to outdo each other in a bid to keep the fear at bay. Jake focused on a group of mannequins posed around a cafe table. The scene was surreal, as if the mannequins were frozen in time, caught in a moment of silent conversation. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching him. Their blank eyes seemed to follow him, their plastic smiles unwavering. It was as if they were mocking him, daring him to come closer. He felt a chill run down his spine, but he couldn't look away.
"Check it out,"
Ryan whispered, pointing to a nearby mannequin. His voice was barely audible, but it carried a weight of urgency. The others turned to look, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing evening gown, her hand outstretched as if beckoning. The gown shimmered in the dim light, adding an otherworldly glow to the scene. It was almost as if she was inviting them into her world.
"Looks like she wants to dance."
He chuckled, striking a pose beside her. The others laughed, but it was a nervous laughter tinged with unease. They were trying to make light of the situation, but the fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. As he did, the mannequin's head turned ever so slightly towards him. It was almost imperceptible, but enough to make his heart skip a beat. He stepped back, his bravado faltering.
Dude, that's creepy.
Ben said, a shiver running down his spine. He tried to laugh it off, but the fear was evident in his eyes. The others exchanged uneasy glances, the reality of their situation starting to sink in. He swore he saw the mannequin's fingers twitch. It was just a tiny movement, but it was enough to send a wave of panic through him. He took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily, her nerves stretched taut, jumped at the sound of a soft sigh. It was so faint that she almost thought she imagined it, but the fear in her eyes said otherwise. She looked around, trying to find the source of the sound. She whirled around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty corridor stretching out into the darkness. She felt a sense of dread wash over her, the feeling that they were being watched growing stronger. Just the shadows and the mannequins, their vacant eyes boring into her soul. It was as if they were alive, watching her every move. She felt a chill run down her spine, the fear almost overwhelming.
Did you guys hear that?
She whispered, her voice trembling. The others paused, their eyes wide with fear. They strained to listen, but the silence was deafening. The others, caught up in their filming, dismissed her fears. They tried to laugh it off, but the unease was still there, lurking beneath the surface. They continued their exploration, but the fear was palpable. They continued their exploration, their laughter echoing in the vast emptiness. It was a hollow sound filled with nervous energy. They tried to keep the mood light, but the fear was still there, lurking in the shadows. But a sense of unease lingered, a prickly feeling that they were not alone. It was as if the shadows were watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. They tried to ignore it, but the fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of their minds. The silence was broken only by the soft rustling of unseen things and the occasional creak of the building settling. It was a haunting sound, echoing through the empty halls. They felt a chill run down their spines, the fear almost overwhelming. They knew they had to keep moving, but the fear was still there, lurking in the shadows. Jake glanced at his watch.
Okay guys, 15 minutes are up. Let's get out of here.
As if on cue, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. Shouts and curses filled the air as they fumbled for their phones, the pale glow of their screens the only light in the suffocating blackness. Panic flared as they stumbled towards the entrance, the heavy door their only escape. But the door wouldn't budge. It was locked, bolted from the outside. Someone had been watching them. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through their bravado. They were trapped. Jake rattled the door handle, his heart pounding against his ribs.
Help, we're locked in!
He yelled, his voice echoing unanswered in the darkness.
Guys, I'm scared.
Chloe whimpered, her voice barely audible. The air was thick with terror, the silence broken only by their panicked breaths. Then, a sound cut through the darkness, a slow, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps approaching. They huddled together, their backs against the cold metal of the door, their eyes wide with fear. Section 4. The Mannequins Move. A cold breeze swept through the atrium, sending a shiver down their spines. The air felt thick with an unspoken dread, as if the very walls of the mall were whispering secrets of the past. The tapping grew louder, closer. It was a rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound that seemed to echo from every direction, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. Then, in the pale light of their phones, they saw it. Shadows danced on the walls, and the faint glow revealed the outlines of figures that should have been still.
A mannequin, the one that had seemed to beckon Ryan, was moving. Its hand, once frozen in a wave, now slowly curled and uncurled, as if inviting them closer.
It glided towards them, its limbs stiff and jerky, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. The glow seemed to pulse, matching the rhythm of the tapping sound, creating an unsettling harmony. Screams ripped through the darkness as the friends scrambled back, their blood turning to ice. Panic set in, and their breaths came in short, frantic gasps.
The mannequin tilted its head, its painted smile widening into a grotesque grin. The smile seemed to stretch impossibly wide, revealing rows of teeth that were never meant to be there.
Another mannequin, this one dressed in a business suit, began to move, its head swiveling towards them, its plastic eyes burning into theirs. It took a step forward, the sound of its footfall echoing ominously. Soon, they were surrounded, a circle of lifeless eyes glowing in the darkness. The mannequins formed a tight ring, their expressions frozen in a mix of mockery and menace. They were no longer mannequins, but something monstrous, something inhuman. Their features twisted and contorted, becoming more grotesque with each passing second.
Their movements, once stiff and jerky, were becoming fluid, purposeful. It was as if they had shed their plastic shells and were now animated by some dark force.
The tapping sound was joined by the rasp of plastic on tile, a chorus of approaching nightmares. The sound grew louder, more insistent, as if urging the friends to flee. The friends backed away, their eyes darting from one menacing figure to another, searching for an escape. Their hearts pounded in their chests, the fear almost palpable. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Every corridor seemed to stretch into an endless void, and every corner held the promise of more horrors. Section 5. Frozen with fear. Terror rooted them to the spot. Their screams died in their throats as the mannequins closed in, their blank eyes boring into them with chilling intensity.
One of them, a tall male mannequin with a blank face, reached out, its hand brushing against Emily's cheek. She recoiled, the plastic touch sending a jolt of pure terror through her.
The mannequins moved with an eerie grace, their movements no longer stiff but fluid, almost human. They advanced slowly, deliberately, savoring their terror.
Jake raised his camera, his finger hovering over the record button. He wanted to capture this to show the world, but his hand trembled uncontrollably.
"We have to do something," Ben shouted, his voice cracking. "But what? How do you fight something that isn't alive or dead?"
Their minds reeled, struggling to grasp the impossible, to find a way out of this nightmare. The mannequins continued their relentless advance, their presence radiating an aura of menace that chilled them to the bone.